The bright afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverdale High School's music room as 15-year-old Melissa Chen's fingers danced across the piano keys. The sweet, complex notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 filled the space, rising and falling like waves in an emotional sea. Her dark hair fell forward slightly as she leaned into a particularly moving passage. Completely lost in the music, when the final note faded away, there was a moment of perfect silence before a single pair of hands began to clap. "Beautiful as always, Melissa," said Mrs. Patel, the school's elderly secretary who often slipped into the music room during her lunch breaks to listen. "You play with your whole heart." Melissa smiled shyly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you. I still need to work on the middle section, though." 10 years, a deep voice announced from the doorway. Mr. Burke, the high school music director, stepped into the room, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the polished floor. 10 years of playing and it shows. You might actually have a shot at the regional youth classical competition this year. Coming from Mr. Burke, this was high praise. He rarely complimented students, believing that praise made musicians soft and complacent. His approach had earned him both respect and fear among the students at Riverdale High. "Thank you, sir," Melissa replied, straightening her posture automatically. Even after 3 years of working with him, his presence still made her nervous. Mrs. Patel gave Melissa's shoulder a gentle squeeze before heading back to the office. Once she left, Mr. Burke's expression shifted slightly. "Your tempo was off in the allegro section," he said, walking toward the piano. "And your left hand was too heavy in measure 53. Melissa nodded, making mental notes. This was the Mr. Burke she knew, critical and exacting. His compliments were rare gems, but his criticisms were daily bread. "Play it again," he instructed, pulling up a chair beside the piano. "And this time remember what I've told you about keeping your wrists higher." For the next hour, Melissa played the same sections over and over, making the adjustments Mr. Burke demanded. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period, her fingers were stiff and her back ached, but the piece sounded noticeably better. "Same time tomorrow," Mr. Burke said as she gathered her sheet music. "The competition is in 6 weeks. If you want that scholarship, every practice counts, the scholarship." That was what it all came down to. The first-place winner of the regional youth classical competition received a $15,000 scholarship toward music education. For Melissa's family, this wasn't just about prestige, it was about making her dream possible. At home that evening, Melissa sat at the kitchen table with her parents, eating the simple stir-fry her father had prepared after his shift at the electronics repair shop. "How was practice?" her mother asked, dark circles visible under her eyes. She had just returned from her second job cleaning offices downtown. "Good," Melissa said, not wanting to burden her parents with details of Mr. Burke's criticism. "Mr. Burke thinks I might have a chance at the competition." Her father's face brightened. "That's wonderful news. Your mother and I were just talking about how we might afford those master classes you wanted to take next summer." Melissa felt a pang of guilt. Her parents had always supported her music, scraping together money for lessons even when times were tough. Her mother had once sold a family heirloom, a jade bracelet from her grandmother, to pay for Melissa's first proper piano lessons. "Don't worry about the master classes," she said quickly. "The regular lessons are enough." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "Your talent deserves proper training, Melissa. We'll find a way." Later that night, Melissa practiced on the old upright piano that took up most of the living room wall in their small apartment. It wasn't a grand piano like the one at school, but it had a warm, rich tone that suited Chopin perfectly. Her fingers moved through the familiar patterns, as her mind wandered back to when her journey with the piano began. She was 5 years old when her kindergarten class visited the local community center where a pianist was performing. Something about the way the woman coaxed both thunder and whispers from the instrument captivated little Melissa. That night she announced to her parents that she wanted to learn to play. They couldn't afford lessons then, so her father found an old keyboard at a garage sale, and Melissa taught herself using library books and YouTube videos until they could finally afford a teacher when she was 8. The memory fueled her determination. Every time her fingers stumbled over a difficult passage, she thought of her parents' sacrifices and pushed herself to try again. The next few weeks followed a relentless rhythm. School, practice, homework, more practice. Mr. Burke grew increasingly demanding as the competition approached, but Melissa met each challenge with quiet determination. She noticed that he seemed especially focused on her progress, often canceling sessions with other students to give her extra time. "He believes in you," her friend Zoe told her during lunch one day. "Everyone knows he only invests time in students he thinks have real potential." This thought gave Melissa courage during the tougher practices when Mr. Burke's criticism felt particularly harsh. If he was pushing her this hard, it must mean he thought she could win. 3 weeks before the competition, Mr. Burke asked Melissa to stay after their regular practice session. "I've entered you officially for the competition," he said, showing her the confirmation email on his phone. "You'll be performing Chopin's Ballet No. 1 as we've been preparing." Melissa felt a flutter of excitement and nerves. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Burke. I won't let you down." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "No, I don't think you will. You have unexpected depth for someone your age." That weekend, Melissa practiced harder than ever. Her mother brought her tea and reminded her to take breaks, but Melissa was driven by a new sense of purpose. Mr. Burke believed in her. She could do this. On Monday, Melissa arrived early for her practice session, eager to show Mr. Burke the improvements she'd made over the weekend. But as she approached the music room, she heard piano music, someone playing her competition piece. Puzzled, she opened the door to find Catherine Powell seated at the grand piano, with Mr. Burke standing beside her, nodding approvingly. Catherine was a talented pianist from the senior class, the daughter of Dr. Powell, who served on the school board and donated generously to the arts program each year. "Ah, Melissa," Mr. Burke said, looking up. "Good, you're early. I wanted to talk to you about the competition." Catherine gathered her sheet music with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Burke," she said, brushing past Melissa on her way out. Once they were alone, Mr. Burke gestured for Melissa to sit down. "There's been a change of plans," he said, his tone businesslike. "Catherine will be representing our school at the regional competition." The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. "But I don't understand. You've been training me for this competition for months." "Yes, well, Catherine has more experience with competitive performances," he explained, not quite meeting Melissa's eyes.
"And frankly, her technique is more polished."
"The competition this year is particularly fierce, and we want to put our best foot forward." "But you said my playing had depth," Melissa said, her voice small but steady. "You said I had a shot at winning." Mr. Burke's expression hardened slightly. "Potential isn't the same as readiness, Melissa. Catherine has been playing for 12 years, not 10. She comes from a musical family, and," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "her father is on the school board. It's simply a better arrangement all around." Melissa felt tears threatening, but blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of Mr. Burke. "So all those extra practices, all that work, was not wasted." Mr. Burke cut in. "You've improved tremendously. Perhaps next year you'll be ready for competition level." Melissa sat very still, trying to process what was happening. All her dreams of the scholarship, all her parents' hopes and sacrifices seemed to crumble around her. "May I go now?" she asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded when she felt anything but calm inside. Mr. Burke nodded, already turning his attention to some papers on his desk. "We'll resume your regular lesson schedule next week." Melissa walked out of the music room, each step feeling heavier than the last. In the empty hallway, she leaned against a wall and finally let the tears come, not just tears of disappointment, but of anger, too. Mr. Burke hadn't chosen Catherine because she was better. Melissa knew her own playing well enough to recognize when someone was truly superior. This was about connections, about politics. As she wiped her eyes, a door opened further down the hallway. Mrs. Wong, her former elementary school music teacher who now taught at the high school part-time, emerged from the teacher's lounge. "Melissa, are you all right?" she asked, walking quickly toward her former student. Looking at Mrs. Wong's kind, concerned face, Melissa made a decision. She wouldn't give up. "Not yet. Actually, Mrs. Wong," she said, straightening her shoulders, "I could use some advice." Mrs. Wong led Melissa to the empty art classroom and pulled out 2 chairs. "Tell me what happened," she said, her kind eyes full of concern. Melissa took a deep breath and explained everything. How Mr. Burke had been training her for months for the regional youth classical competition. How he had suddenly replaced her with Catherine Powell. and how the scholarship meant everything to her family. "I know Catherine isn't better than me," Melissa said, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Burke just picked her because her dad is on the school board." Mrs. Wong listened quietly, her expression growing more troubled as Melissa spoke. "That doesn't sound like fair treatment," she said finally. "But sadly, I've seen this kind of thing before. Teachers playing favorites, especially with students from influential families." "What should I do?" Melissa asked. "My parents have been working extra shifts to pay for my lessons. This scholarship was our only chance for me to attend summer music camp." Mrs. Wong thought for a moment, tapping her fingers against the desk. "You know, there's more than one way to enter that competition." "What do you mean?" "The regional competition allows individual entries, not just school-sponsored ones. You'd need a recommendation from a qualified music teacher, but," Mrs. Wong smiled, "I happen to be qualified." Hope flickered in Melissa's chest for the first time since her conversation with Mr. Burke. "You'd do that for me?" "Of course. I've known your talent since you were 10 years old, Melissa." "But," she cautioned, "this won't be easy. Mr. Burke won't be happy about it, and you'll need to find practice time outside of school hours since he controls the music room schedule." "I can practice at home," Melissa said quickly. "We have an upright piano. It's old, but the sound is good. And I can let you use the elementary school piano room during my free periods on Tuesdays and Thursdays," Mrs. Wong offered. "It's not a grand piano, but it's better than nothing." They made a plan. Mrs. Wong would submit the individual entry form that evening, and they would start additional practice sessions immediately. Melissa felt a new determination rising within her, stronger than her disappointment. That evening, Melissa decided not to tell her parents about being replaced. They would only worry, and her mother might even confront Mr. Burke, which could make things worse. Instead, she told them she was getting extra practice help from Mrs. Wong to strengthen her chances at the competition. "That's wonderful," her father said, looking up from the broken laptop he was fixing at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Wong always believed in you." "Just don't overdo it," her mother cautioned, noticing the dark circles under Melissa's eyes. "Your health comes first." "I won't, Mom," Melissa promised, though she knew the coming weeks would be grueling. The next day at school, Melissa tried to act normally during her regular lesson with Mr. Burke. He was teaching her a new piece, something simpler than the Chopin she'd been practicing for months. "We'll focus on technique for a while," he said, marking her sheet music with a red pen. "Your arpeggios need work." Melissa nodded, keeping her face neutral. Inside, she was seething. He was treating her like a beginner again, as if all her hard work on the ballet had never happened. After school, she hurried to the elementary school 3 blocks away. Mrs. Wong was waiting in the small music room, which smelled of chalk and children's snacks. "First things first," Mrs. Wong said, pulling out a copy of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. "Play it through for me, exactly as you've been practicing it." Melissa sat at the upright piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The familiar notes flowed from her fingers, each phrase telling part of the emotional story that Chopin had written into the music. When she finished, she looked up to see Mrs. Wong staring at her with wide eyes. "Melissa," she said quietly. "That was stunning." "Really? But Mr. Burke said my technique wasn't polished enough and—" "Mr. Burke," Mrs. Wong interrupted, "is wrong. Your technique is excellent, but more importantly, you play with heart. You understand the music, not just the notes." For the next hour, they worked together, not on technique, but on interpretation, how to bring out the emotional story in the music even more clearly. Mrs. Wong's approach was completely different from Mr. Burke's. Where he was critical and cold, she was encouraging and warm, pushing Melissa to find her own voice in the music. "The competition judges will hear dozens of technically perfect performances," Mrs. Wong explained. "What will set you apart is making them feel something." The next 2 weeks fell into an exhausting but exhilarating routine. School during the day, regular lessons with Mr. Burke where she dutifully practiced the simpler pieces he assigned, then secret sessions with Mrs. Wong 3 times a week where she polished her competition piece. At home, she practiced late into the night, using a silicone practice pad when it got too late to play the real piano. Word about the situation began to spread among the other music students. Zoe cornered Melissa in the cafeteria one day. "Is it true you got bumped from the competition for Catherine Powell?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Melissa hesitated, then nodded. Zoe's eyes narrowed. That's messed up. Everyone knows you're better than her. Please don't make a big deal about it, Melissa begged. I'm still going to compete, just not as the school representative. Wait, what? How? Mrs. Wong is sponsoring me as an individual entrant, but Mr. Burke doesn't know, and I'd like to keep it that way until it's too late for him to interfere. Zoe mimed, zipping her lips, but the secret didn't stay contained for long. By the end of the week, many students knew, and their whispered support followed Melissa through the hallways. A few even offered to help, like Thomas from the tech club, who recorded her playing so she could listen and identify areas for improvement. 10 days before the competition, disaster struck. Melissa arrived at the elementary school for her practice session with Mrs. Wong, only to find a substitute teacher in the music room. Mrs. Wong called in sick today, the substitute explained, some kind of stomach bug going around. Melissa thanked her and left, trying to quell her rising panic. She needed these practice sessions. The competition was approaching fast, and there was still so much work to do. When she got home, she found her father installing weather stripping around their front door. The neighbors complained about your late night practicing, he explained, looking apologetic. I'm trying to soundproof a bit better, but maybe you should cut back on the night sessions for a while. Melissa felt the walls closing in. Where could she practice now? The answer came from an unexpected source. The next morning, Zoe slipped a note into Melissa's locker. Basement practice room. Lunch period. It's never used. Curious and desperate, Melissa followed the directions during lunch. In the school's basement level, past the boiler room and storage areas, she found a small, dusty room with an old piano. The room had clearly once been a practice space, but had been forgotten when the new music wing was built. To her surprise, the piano was in decent shape, just out of tune in the upper register. Melissa wiped the dust from the keys and began to play softly, testing the sound. It would work. For the next week, this forgotten room became her sanctuary. She practiced there during lunch and after school, working through the challenging passages of the ballade over and over. Sometimes she imagined the faces of the competition judges or her parents' proud smiles when she won the scholarship. Other times she pictured Mr. Burke's shock when he realized what she had done. One day, absorbed in playing, she didn't hear the door open. When she finished the piece, a voice from behind made her jump. That was quite beautiful. An elderly man stood in the doorway, his white hair neatly combed, his eyes bright behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a stack of books and wore a volunteer badge. I'm sorry, Melissa stammered. I didn't know anyone else came down here. I was shelving some books in the old storage room when I heard the music. He smiled. It's been years since anyone played in this room. I'm Harold Jenkins, by the way. I volunteer in the library. I'm Melissa Chen. I'm practicing for a competition. Chopin's Ballade No. 1. He nodded. A challenging choice, may I? He gestured toward the piano bench. Melissa moved over and Mr. Jenkins sat down, placing his gnarled hands on the keys. Without any warm-up, he launched into the same piece she had been playing, but with a fluidity and emotional depth that left her speechless. His fingers, despite their age, moved with precision and grace across the keyboard. When he finished, Melissa could only stare. That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that? Mr. Jenkins chuckled. I spent 40 years as a concert pianist, toured all over Europe and Asia. Now I'm retired and just volunteer to keep myself busy. He looked at her curiously, but the real question is, why is a talented young pianist like you practicing in this dusty old room instead of the beautiful music wing upstairs? Melissa hesitated, then found herself telling him everything, about Mr. Burke's betrayal, about Mrs. Wong's help, and about how Mrs. Wong's illness had left her without proper guidance just before the competition. Mr. Jenkins listened thoughtfully. When she finished, he nodded once decisively. Well then, it seems you need a new teacher for the next week. He rolled up his sleeves. Let's get to work, shall we? We'll start with that tricky passage in the development section. For the first time in days, Melissa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. With Mr. Jenkins' help, she might actually have a chance, thank you, she said, meaning it from the bottom of her heart. Don't thank me yet, he replied with a twinkle in his eye. I'm a much tougher teacher than your Mrs. Wong. Now from the beginning, and this time, really listen to what Chopin is trying to tell us. The basement practice room quickly became transformed under Mr. Jenkins's influence. He brought in a small lamp from the library to replace the harsh fluorescent lighting. He wiped years of dust from the old piano with a handkerchief he dampened at the water fountain. He even taped a small photograph of Chopin to the music stand for inspiration. Most people play Chopin like he's delicate, fragile, Mr. Jenkins explained during their third session together. But the man had fire in his soul. Listen. His fingers struck the keys with controlled power, drawing out a passion from the music that Melissa had never heard before. The notes seemed to vibrate with life, telling a story of heartbreak and triumph that made her throat tight with emotion. That's what you need to find, he said, stopping abruptly in the middle of a phrase. Not just perfect notes, but the story beneath them. Melissa nodded, taking his place at the piano bench. As she played, she tried to channel that same intensity, that same fire. Sometimes she caught glimpses of it, moments where the music transcended technique and became something more. But those moments were fleeting. Better, Mr. Jenkins said when she finished. But you're still thinking too much about the notes. Close your eyes. What? Close your eyes and play. Not the whole piece, just the opening theme. Feeling a bit silly, Melissa closed her eyes and positioned her hands on the keys. Without visual cues, she had to rely entirely on touch and memory. She began to play hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Something strange happened as the darkness behind her eyelids continued. Without the distraction of watching her hands or the sheet music, she began to hear the music differently. The melody became a voice speaking directly to her heart. Her fingers responded naturally, shaping the phrases with a new sensitivity. There, Mr. Jenkins exclaimed, making her jump and open her eyes. Did you feel that? For a moment you weren't playing Chopin, you were speaking Chopin. Melissa nodded, a bit dazed by the experience. It felt different. That's what we're after. Not perfection, connection. The judges will hear dozens of technically correct performances. They'll remember the one that moves them. Over the next few days, Mr. Jenkins pushed Melissa in ways Mr. Burke never had. Where Mr. Burke had been concerned with precision and technique, Mr. Jenkins focused on expression and emotional truth. He told her stories about Chopin's life, about the political exile and personal heartbreak that influenced his music. Imagine you're telling his story through your fingers, he suggested. Every note is a word, every phrase a sentence. Between sessions with Mr. Jenkins, Melissa continued attending her regular classes with Mr. Burke, who remained unaware of her secret competition preparations. He had her working on simple etudes, occasionally making comments about how she wasn't ready for more advanced repertoire yet. Each time he said it, Melissa bit her tongue and focused on the knowledge that soon, very soon, he would discover how wrong he was. 4 days before the competition, Mrs. Wong returned to school looking pale but determined. She found Melissa in the hallway between classes. I'm so sorry I've been absent, she said. This flu knocked me flat. Have you been able to keep practicing? Yes, actually, Melissa replied with a smile. I found help in an unexpected place. She told Mrs. Wong about Mr. Jenkins in the basement practice room. Mrs. Wong's eyes widened. Harold Jenkins? The Harold Jenkins who played with the Vienna Philharmonic. He volunteers here? He works in the library, Melissa confirmed. Do you know him? Know him? Melissa, he's a legend. I saw him perform Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto 20 years ago in Chicago. The audience gave him a 15-minute standing ovation. Melissa felt her jaw drop. Mr. Jenkins had mentioned being a concert pianist, but he'd been so humble about it that she hadn't realized just how accomplished he was. He's been helping me with the ballad, she said, teaching me to find the story in the music. Mrs. Wong shook her head in amazement. You couldn't ask for a better coach. Well, it's incredible luck. Later that day, when Melissa told Mr. Jenkins what Mrs. Wong had said, he waved it away with a chuckle. Fame is fleeting and largely meaningless, he said. What matters is the music. Now let's work on that coda again. You're rushing it. But Melissa couldn't help looking at him differently, with a new appreciation for who he was and what he was doing for her. A world-renowned pianist was giving her private lessons in a forgotten basement room, asking nothing in return. The realization made her even more determined not to waste this opportunity. The day before the competition, Mr. Jenkins suggested they do a full run-through of the piece, treating it like a real performance. Play it for me as if your future depends on it, he said, settling into a folding chair he'd positioned at the far end of the small room. Because in a way it does. Melissa took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Even though it was just Mr. Jenkins watching, the pressure of the moment felt real. Tomorrow she would play this piece in front of actual judges, competing against Catherine Powell and all the other pianists from the region. The thought made her hands tremble slightly. "Close your eyes for a moment," Mr. Jenkins suggested gently. "Remember why you play." Melissa closed her eyes. Images flashed through her mind. Her parents' proud faces when she'd mastered her first difficult piece. The peaceful feeling of losing herself in music after a hard day. The pure joy of creating something beautiful with just her hands and her heart. When she opened her eyes again, the trembling had stopped. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The music flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. Each phrase connected to the next, telling Chopin's story and, in some way, her own. The challenging passages that had once seemed impossible now unfolded with grace and clarity. When she reached the powerful coda, her heart swelled with the emotion of it, driving the piece to its thunderous conclusion. In the silence that followed, Melissa looked up at Mr. Jenkins. To her shock, there were tears in his eyes. "That," he said quietly, "was magnificent." Before she could respond, the door to the practice room swung open. Mr. Burke stood in the doorway, his face a mask of surprise and anger. "What is going on here?" he demanded, looking from Melissa to Mr. Jenkins. "This area is off limits to students." Mr. Jenkins rose to his feet with dignity. "Ah, you must be Mr. Burke. I've heard so much about you." "And you are?" "Harold Jenkins. I volunteer in the library." Mr. Burke's eyes narrowed with recognition. "The pianist?" "Former pianist. Now just an old man who appreciates hearing beautiful music." Mr. Jenkins gestured toward Melissa. "Your student is quite talented." "I'm well aware of my student's capabilities," Mr. Burke said stiffly. "Melissa, you should be in study hall right now." "I have a free period on Thursdays," Melissa replied, her voice steadier than she expected it to be. "I was practicing." "Practicing what exactly?" Mr. Burke's gaze fell on the sheet music on the piano. "Is that Chopin's Ballade? The competition piece?" Melissa lifted her chin. "Yes, I'm performing it tomorrow at the Regional Youth Classical Competition." Mr. Burke's face paled, then flushed with anger. "That's impossible. Catherine Powell is our school's representative. Melissa has entered as an individual competitor," Mr. Jenkins explained calmly. "Quite within the rules, I assure you." For a moment, Mr. Burke seemed speechless. Then he turned to Melissa, his voice cold. "You went behind my back. After everything I've taught you, after you took away an opportunity I earned," Melissa interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "I worked for months on that piece. I was ready. But you gave my spot to Catherine because her dad is on the school board. That is not," Mr. Burke began, but Mr. Jenkins cut him off. "Perhaps this isn't the best time for this discussion," he suggested. "Melissa needs to rest before tomorrow's competition. Arguing will only sap her energy." Mr. Burke looked like he wanted to say more, but he controlled himself with visible effort. "We'll discuss this after the competition," he said to Melissa, his tone making it clear that the discussion would not be pleasant. With a final glare, he turned and left, closing the door firmly behind him. Melissa slumped on the piano bench. "He's so angry." "Of course he is," Mr. Jenkins said matter-of-factly. "You've challenged his authority. People in positions of power rarely appreciate that." He sat down beside her. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Today we focus on the music. What if he tries to stop me from competing? He can't. Your entry has been accepted and processed. Besides," Mr. Jenkins added with a twinkle in his eye, "Mrs. Wong and I will be there to make sure everything goes smoothly." Melissa nodded, trying to push thoughts of Mr. Burke from her mind. "Should we run through the piece one more time?" Mr. Jenkins shook his head. "No, you've done all the work you can do. Now it's time to rest your mind and your fingers. Go home, have a good meal, sleep well. Tomorrow you'll show everyone exactly what you're capable of." As Melissa packed up her sheet music, she felt a strange mixture of terror and excitement. After weeks of secret practices and emotional ups and downs, the competition was finally here. Tomorrow would change everything one way or another. "Thank you," she said to Mr. Jenkins, "for everything." He smiled gently. "The talent was always yours, Melissa. I just helped you find it." Melissa barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her fingers moved in silent rehearsal, playing through tricky passages of the ballade. She imagined different scenarios for the competition, sometimes triumphing to thunderous applause, other times freezing up and forgetting the notes entirely. By the time dawn filtered through her curtains, she felt exhausted but too wired to rest. Her mother noticed her picking at breakfast. "Nervous about today?" Melissa nodded, pushing her cereal around the bowl. "What if I mess up?" "Then you'll have learned something for next time," her father said, joining them at the table with a cup of coffee. "But you won't mess up. You've been practicing for months." If only they knew the whole story, Melissa thought. They still believed she was competing as the school's representative, with Mr. Burke's blessing. She hadn't found the courage to tell them otherwise. "We're so proud of you for making it this far," her mother said, squeezing her shoulder, "no matter what happens today." The regional youth classical competition was being held at Westfield Community College, about 40 minutes from Melissa's home. Her parents had both taken the day off work to drive her there, a sacrifice that added to the pressure she felt. The family car was old and not entirely reliable, so they left extra early to account for any potential problems. They arrived at the college's Performing Arts Center almost an hour before Melissa's scheduled performance time. The gleaming modern building with its glass front and sweeping roof looked intimidating. Melissa clutched her sheet music to her chest as they walked through the automatic doors into the bustling lobby. Young musicians and their families filled the space, some pacing nervously, others warming up their fingers with silent keyboard exercises. Melissa scanned the crowd for any familiar faces, but saw no one from her school. "Let's find your check-in desk," her father suggested, guiding them through the throng toward a sign that read, "Performer Registration." At the desk, a friendly woman with curly hair checked Melissa's name against a list. "Chen Melissa, individual entrant, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." She handed Melissa a badge with her name and performance number. "You're in Group C, which starts at 11:30. Please be in the warm-up room at least 20 minutes before your scheduled time." Melissa nodded, taking the badge with slightly trembling hands. This was real. It was actually happening. As they moved away from the registration desk, Melissa spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Catherine Powell, surrounded by her parents and Mr. Burke. Catherine looked pale and nervous, repeatedly tucking her straight blonde hair behind her ears. "Isn't that your music teacher?" her mother asked, noticing Mr. Burke as well. Before Melissa could answer, Mrs. Wong appeared beside them, slightly breathless as if she'd been rushing. "Melissa, I was hoping to catch you before you registered." She greeted Melissa's parents warmly, then turned back to Melissa. "How are you feeling? Ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be, I guess," Melissa replied, grateful for the familiar face. "You've done all the preparation. Now just focus on the music, not the audience or the judges." Mrs. Wong lowered her voice. "Mr. Jenkins is already here. He's in the audience, 4th row center. He asked me to give you this." She handed Melissa a small envelope. Inside was a simple note card with a quote written in elegant handwriting. "Play from your heart, not from your fear. H.J." Melissa tucked the card into her pocket, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. With Mrs. Wong and Mr. Jenkins here to support her, alongside her parents, she could do this. The next hour passed in a blur of nervous waiting. Melissa's parents found seats in the auditorium, while Mrs. Wong stayed with her, helping her stay focused and calm. They could hear the performances of Group A and Group B through the speakers in the warm-up area, some impressive, others marred by obvious mistakes. Finally, a coordinator called for Group C performers to line up. Melissa was number 34, right in the middle of the group. As she took her place in line, she noticed Catherine standing just 2 spots ahead of her, looking increasingly unwell. Mr. Burke stood beside her, speaking in low, urgent tones. As the line began to move, Melissa caught snippets of their conversation. "Just breathe deeply," Mr. Burke was saying. "You've practiced this 100 times." "I don't feel good," Catherine whispered back, her face ashen. "I think I might throw up. It's just nerves. Everyone gets them. You'll be fine once you start playing." But Catherine didn't look fine. She swayed slightly, putting a hand against the wall to steady herself. Melissa felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. Stage fright could be crippling, and Catherine looked truly ill. The line continued to move forward as performers entered the auditorium, played their pieces, and exited through a side door. Melissa's heart pounded harder with each advancing step. Finally, Catherine's turn came. She walked onto the stage with visible effort. Mr. Burke watching anxiously from the wings. Through the stage door, Melissa could see Catherine seat herself at the grand piano and place her hands on the keys. She began to play Chopin's Ballade, the same piece Melissa had prepared, but within the first few measures something was clearly wrong. Her tempo was uneven, her touch heavy. Halfway through the introduction, she stopped abruptly, placed a hand over her mouth, and rushed from the stage. A murmur ran through the audience. The head judge stood up and approached the stage, conferring with Mr. Burke. After a moment, the judge returned to his seat and made an announcement. Due to sudden illness, competitor number 32 will be unable to continue. We will proceed with number 33. The next performer, a tall boy with glasses, took his place at the piano. Melissa barely heard his performance, her mind racing. Catherine had gotten sick, actually physically sick, and now it would be her turn next. As the boy finished his piece, a competition coordinator approached Melissa. "You're number 34, correct?" "Melissa Chen?" She nodded. "There's been a slight change. Mr. Burke has requested that you perform in place of Riverdale High School's official entrant, who has fallen ill. Would you be willing to represent your school instead of competing as an individual?" Melissa stared at the coordinator in shock. "Mr. Burke asked for me specifically?" "Yes. He said you've been preparing the same piece and are the only suitable replacement. But the choice is yours. You can still compete as an individual if you prefer." Melissa's mind whirled. After everything that had happened, Mr. Burke's betrayal, the secret practices, the confrontation, he was now asking her to step in and save face for the school. There was a certain irony to it. "Can I have a moment to decide?" she asked. The coordinator nodded, and Melissa stepped aside to think. As she did, she noticed Mr. Burke watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away. What would representing the school mean? It would certainly look better on college applications. Her parents would be proud, but it would also mean in some way forgiving Mr. Burke's unfair treatment of her. Was she ready to do that? Before she could make up her mind, Mrs. Wong appeared at her side. "I overheard," she said quietly. "This is your decision, Melissa. But remember why you're here. For the music and for the scholarship. The rest is just politics." Melissa took a deep breath. Mrs. Wong was right. Whatever had happened with Mr. Burke, whatever might happen after today, the most important thing was the music itself. And the scholarship that could change her future. "I'll do it," she told the coordinator. "I'll represent Riverdale High." The coordinator smiled. "Excellent. They're just about to call you. Good luck." As the boy on stage finished his piece to polite applause, Melissa straightened her shoulders and prepared to enter. She could see her parents in the audience, looking confused at the announcement of the change, but supportive as always. Mr. Jenkins sat exactly where Mrs. Wong had said he would be, his eyes alert and encouraging. Next, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, representing Riverdale High School, Melissa Chen. The stage lights were brighter than Melissa had expected, making the audience beyond them seem like a dark, faceless mass. The grand piano gleamed under the spotlights, its lid raised to project the sound to the farthest corners of the auditorium. As Melissa seated herself at the piano, adjusting the bench to her height, a strange calm settled over her. All the drama, all the politics, all the nervousness, none of it mattered now. It was just her and the piano and Chopin's beautiful, haunting music. She placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes rang out clear and thoughtful, setting the scene for the musical story about to unfold. As she moved into the main theme, Melissa closed her eyes briefly, remembering Mr. Jenkins' words, "Play from your heart, not from your fear." Her fingers found their own path through the familiar territory, drawing out melodies that spoke of longing and hope, of struggle and triumph. She thought of her parents' sacrifices, of Mrs. Wong's kindness, of Mr. Jenkins' wisdom, even of Mr. Burke's complicated role in bringing her to this moment. All of it flowed into the music, giving it a depth and authenticity that technical perfection alone could never achieve. When she struck the final chord, Melissa sat perfectly still for a moment, letting the sound resonate through the hall until it faded to silence. Then slowly she opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. They were on their feet. The applause was deafening, washing over her in waves. Her parents were beaming, her mother wiping away tears. Mr. Jenkins was nodding, a satisfied smile on his face. and throughout the auditorium, strangers were clapping enthusiastically, moved by what they'd heard. As Melissa rose to take her bow, she caught sight of Mr. Burke standing at the edge of the stage. For just a moment their eyes met, and she saw something unexpected in his expression, a grudging respect, perhaps even a hint of regret. Melissa floated off the stage in a daze, the applause still ringing in her ears. In the wings, Mrs. Wong waited with a huge smile and open arms. "That was magnificent," she whispered as they hugged. "Absolutely magnificent." Before Melissa could respond, her parents rushed backstage, having been given special permission by one of the attendants. Her mother's eyes were red from crying, and her father looked like he might burst with pride. "We had no idea," her mother said, embracing her tightly. "Why didn't you tell us you were entering on your own? And then representing the school at the last minute?" "It's a long story," Melissa replied, looking over her mother's shoulder to where Mr. Burke stood a short distance away, watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. "I'll explain everything later." More competitors were lining up to perform, so they moved to a quieter area in the hallway outside the auditorium. Mr. Jenkins joined them a few minutes later, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "You found the heart of the music," he said simply. "Everything else is just details." As they waited for all the performers to finish, Melissa finally explained the whole story to her parents, how Mr. Burke had replaced her with Catherine, how Mrs. Wong had helped her enter independently, and how Mr. Jenkins had become her secret coach in the basement practice room. She described the confrontation with Mr. Burke and, finally, the ironic twist of being asked to represent the school after Catherine fell ill. Her parents' expressions changed from confusion to dismay to anger as the story unfolded. "That's completely unfair," her father said, his voice rising. "We should speak to the principal about this. Mr. Burke had no right to—" "Dad, please," Melissa interrupted. "Not today. Today is about the music, remember? Besides," she added with a small smile, "I think I've made my point." Her father looked like he wanted to argue further, but her mother placed a calming hand on his arm. "She's right, dear. Let's focus on celebrating her performance. We can deal with Mr. Burke another time." The judges took nearly an hour to deliberate after the final competitor played. Everyone gathered in the auditorium for the awards announcement, a tense silence falling over the crowd as the head judge approached the microphone. "Before we announce the winners," he began, "the judging panel would like to thank all of our talented young musicians for their performances today. The level of skill and dedication displayed has been truly impressive." He went on to explain the judging criteria: technical proficiency, interpretation, stage presence, and difficulty of repertoire, before finally moving to the results. In third place, with a beautiful rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune, Thomas Nguyen from Oak Ridge Academy. A slender boy with glasses made his way to the stage amid polite applause to receive a bronze medal and certificate. In second place, performing Liszt's La Campanella with exceptional technical skill, Anthony Wilson from St. Margaret's School. The audience applauded again as a tall boy with curly hair accepted his silver medal. Melissa held her breath. There were only two possibilities now. Either she had won first place, or she hadn't placed at all. And the first place winner, whose performance demonstrated not only technical mastery, but also profound emotional depth and understanding of the composer's intentions. The judge paused dramatically, scanning the audience. Performing Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, Melissa Chen from Riverdale High School. The audience erupted in applause as Melissa sat frozen in shock. Mrs. Wong nudged her gently. "That's you, go on." On trembling legs, Melissa made her way to the stage. The head judge smiled warmly as he placed the gold medal around her neck and handed her an envelope and certificate. "Congratulations," he said. "Your performance today was extraordinary. The scholarship details are in the envelope. $15,000 toward your continued music education. Use it wisely." "Thank you," Melissa managed to say, though she could barely hear her own voice over the pounding of her heart. As she turned to face the audience, she saw her parents on their feet clapping wildly. Mr. Jenkins stood beside them, his weathered hands coming together in dignified approval, and there at the back of the auditorium stood Mr. Burke, his expression a complex mixture of emotions, pride, regret, and perhaps a touch of embarrassment. The reception afterward was a blur of congratulations and introductions. Representatives from music schools and summer programs pressed business cards into her hands. Other competitors came to compliment her performance. Through it all, Melissa kept glancing toward the corner where Mr. Burke stood alone, nursing a cup of punch. Finally, as the crowd began to thin, she excused herself from a conversation with a Juilliard pre-college program recruiter and made her way over to him. "Mr. Burke," she said simply. He looked up, seeming surprised that she had sought him out. "Melissa, congratulations on your win. It was well-deserved." "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why did you ask me to represent the school today? After everything that happened?" Mr. Burke sighed, setting down his cup on a nearby table. "Because you were the best pianist we had. When Catherine got sick, the choice was clear." He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself before adding, "I should have made that choice from the beginning." Melissa hadn't expected such a straightforward admission. "Then why didn't you?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Politics. Pressure. Dr. Powell has a lot of influence on the school board, and he made it clear he expected his daughter to be featured in the competition. I convinced myself that Catherine was ready, that the difference between your playing and hers wasn't significant enough to justify the hassle of going against his wishes. But it was." Melissa said quietly, "Yes." Mr. Burke met her eyes directly for the first time. "It was, and I knew it even then. I made the wrong choice, and I apologize." The apology took her by surprise. In all her years of studying with Mr. Burke, she had never heard him admit to being wrong about anything. "I appreciate that," she said after a moment. "But I think you also owe an apology to someone else." Mr. Burke frowned. "Who?" "Catherine." At his confused expression, she continued, "You knew she wasn't ready. You put her in a position she wasn't prepared for, and today she got physically ill from the stress of it. That wasn't fair to her either." Mr. Burke was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. Again." He glanced across the reception hall to where Catherine sat with her parents, looking pale but recovered. "I'll speak with her." Before he could walk away, Melissa added, "I still want to study with you, Mr. Burke. You're a good teacher, even if you made a bad decision. But I need to know that you'll be fair going forward, to all your students." He looked at her with new respect in his eyes. "I will be. You have my word." As Mr. Burke made his way across the hall toward Catherine and her parents, Mrs. Wong appeared at Melissa's side. "That looked like a serious conversation," she observed. "It was," Melissa replied. "But a good one, I think." Mr. Jenkins joined them, his eyes following Mr. Burke. "Some lessons are harder to learn than others, especially for those who are used to being the teacher rather than the student." "Do you think he meant it?" Melissa asked. "About being fair from now on?" "People can change," Mrs. Wong said, "especially when they're confronted with the consequences of their actions as publicly as he was today." Mr. Jenkins nodded in agreement. "Pride is a powerful force, but humility can be even more transformative. I think your Mr. Burke has had a taste of both today." Melissa's parents approached, her father carrying her coat. "Ready to go, sweetheart? We thought we might stop for dinner to celebrate on the way home. Your choice of restaurant." "Actually," Mr. Jenkins interjected, "if you don't mind, I'd like to invite all of you to join me for dinner. My treat. We have a victory to celebrate after all." "Oh, we couldn't possibly," her mother began, but Mr. Jenkins waved away her protest. "I insist. It's not every day one gets to witness the birth of a true artist." Over dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant near the college, the conversation flowed easily. Mr. Jenkins shared stories from his performing days, making them all laugh with tales of mishaps and adventures on the international concert circuit. Mrs. Wong and Melissa's parents exchanged notes about recognizing and nurturing talent in children. And Melissa, the gold medal tucked safely in her pocket alongside the scholarship envelope, simply soaked it all in, feeling a contentment that went beyond the excitement of winning. As coffee and dessert arrived, Mr. Jenkins turned to Melissa with a more serious expression. "So what will you do with the scholarship? Summer music camp as you planned?" Melissa nodded. "Yes, but that won't use all of it. I was thinking maybe private lessons during the school year too, to prepare for college auditions." "A wise investment," Mr. Jenkins approved. "And speaking of private lessons," he hesitated, then continued, "I've been considering taking on a small number of students in my retirement. Nothing formal, Just one or two particularly promising young pianists. If you're interested, that is. Melissa nearly dropped her fork. You'd teach me? Regularly? Every Saturday morning, if that works for your schedule. Mr. Jenkins smiled. The basement practice room has a certain charm, but I think my living room with the baby grand would be more comfortable. Yes, of course I'm interested. Melissa looked to her parents, who were beaming. That would be amazing. Later that night, as Melissa hung her gold medal on her bedroom wall, she reflected on the whirlwind journey of the past few weeks. From disappointment to triumph, from feeling powerless to finding her voice, both in music and in standing up for herself. The path hadn't been easy, but each difficult step had led her here, to this moment of achievement and new beginnings. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Zoe. Congratulations! Everyone at school is talking about how you killed it at the competition. Mr. Burke looked like he'd seen a ghost when he came back. Can't wait to hear all about it Monday? Melissa smiled and typed back a quick thanks. Monday would bring its own challenges. Returning to school, facing Mr. Burke in a new dynamic, dealing with the attention from her classmates. But she felt ready for whatever came next. She picked up the note card Mr. Jenkins had given her before her performance. Play from your heart, not from your fear. It was good advice, not just for music, but for life. And that's exactly what she intended to do.